Hi scholars, this is William again, and the purpose of this video is going to be talking about the levels or types of communication. Now many communication textbooks will refer to this as the levels of communication. The problem with that is sometimes when people think of levels, they think of one being deeper than the other, and that's not actually the case here. Instead, we're really talking about different types of communication. There are 6 recognized types of communication that we're going to be talking about: intrapersonal, interpersonal, group, organizational, public, and mediated. The first type is something called intrapersonal communication. Intrapersonal communication is the interaction involving only one person. So in other words, it's you communicating with you. This includes things like internal dialogue, where we talk to ourselves, daydreaming and night dreaming, and something called neurological communication, which is the interaction between your brain and itself and the rest of your body. Intrapersonal communication is the most important of the types, and it's the most important for 2 basic reasons. First of all, it's needed for survival. You can survive far longer without food, air, water, or shelter than you can without this. The second reason is this is the source and defense of one's self-concept. Now, self-concept is a new idea for many of you, but basically your self-concept is your subjective interpretation of who you are. Now, our mind naturally craves consistency. So once you have an idea of who you are, you will naturally try to behave consistent with that perception. From the time you're born and throughout your entire life, society and other people are going to try to define you. They're going to try to tell you what kind of a person you are. Your only defense against this, your only ability for you to choose your self-concept, is through this intrapersonal communication. Next is interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication generally involves about 2 to 5 people. It's face-to-face, and the rules are non-codified. Now, the idea of codified rules might be new for many of you. So what it means for rules to be codified is that it means they're very structured and formalized, typically written down. In interpersonal communication, we have rules, but we typically don't structure and formalize them. I mean, when you get together with your friends, you probably don't say, okay, I'll speak for 2 minutes. You will have 30 seconds to ask me a question. I'll have 45 seconds to answer your question. You'll have 15 seconds to rebut my answer. We don't do that. At least most of us don't. But there are rules, and different groups of friends have different sets of rules. For example, a non-codified rule that some groups have is if somebody is talking and you want to talk, you might lean forward a little bit. Your eyebrows subconsciously rise. You listen intently for them. When they finish, you begin. In other groups, when somebody else is talking and you want to talk, you just talk louder than the other guy. And it gets louder and louder and louder until one person gives up and the other person gets to speak. So we all have rules that govern our conversations with people, but here at Interpersonal, they tend not to be structured and formalized. Interpersonal communication really is the study of our interpersonal relationships. So in a course on interpersonal communication, they're going to look at things like family communication, how parents communicate with children, siblings communicate with each other, how we communicate with our parents, friendships, romantic relationships, etc. So this includes things like conversation and relationship analysis, attraction, which is relationship selection, self-disclosure, which is when we voluntarily reveal information about ourselves, effective listening, interpersonal conflict, etc. Next is group communication. Group communication generally involves 3 to 20 people, typically face-to-face, and here the rules are codified, which means the rules are very structured and formalized. For example, a lot of governments and business organizations use codified rules called Robert's Rules of Order, a form of parliamentary procedure. If you've ever been to summer camp and everybody's sitting around in a circle around the campfire and whoever holds the stuffed animal or the seashell gets to talk and everybody else has to be quiet, that's a codified rule that makes it group communication rather than interpersonal. So when all the campers are gathering together and they're joking and giggling and talking with each other, that's interpersonal communication. And then at some point the camp leader stands up and kind of calls the meeting to order and says, okay, campers, Stephanie has the stuffed animal, so Stephanie gets to talk, everybody else please be quiet. That's when it transitions from interpersonal communication into group communication. Now in a class on group communication, the primary focus is how to be a more effective leader. A common misconception that people have is they believe that leadership is something you're born with. You're either born a leader or not. But leadership, like any other skill, is something that people can learn. Somebody might be born with certain characteristics that give them an advantage in leadership, but that's really no different than somebody born with certain characteristics that give them an advantage to be a musician or an athlete. These are skills that can be taught. So the group class will focus on leadership, group dynamics, something called synergy, where the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts, teamwork, conflict management within groups, etc. Next is organizational communication. Organizational communication is the transmission and receiving of information between elements of an institution. So a common topic that is covered in organizational communication might include something like communication networks. Communication networks looks at the flow of information between different elements of an institution. It's a diagram that helps us understand how this organization is managing the inherent conflict of interest between the speed of the decision and the quality of the decision. Here we look at 3 different communication networks as examples. In the wheel, one element sits at the center of communication, controls information flow. Here, the decisions can be made very quickly, but the quality of decision isn't necessarily as great. You can think of it almost as if the element that sits at the center is in the middle of the wheel with spokes going out to the different elements. All the information flows to the center and from the center to the other elements. In the chain, one element is at the center, but it's not as centralized. Here you have the center, but then next to the center are what we call insiders, and then next to that are the outsiders. Finally, there's a network that I've seen called open, I've seen it called star, I've seen it called circle. Here, there's a free flow of information. All the elements communicate with each other, and there isn't a central point disseminating the information. The next level is public communication. Public communication is the interaction between a speaker and an audience, what we oftentimes refer to as public speaking. Traditionally, public speaking was taught as one-way communication, a speaker sending messages to an audience. We need to break ourselves of that perception. Public speaking is actually a conversation between the speaker and an audience, in which only one of them, the speaker, is communicating verbally, and the audience is communicating nonverbally. With that understanding, speakers need to be able to rewrite their speech while they're giving it. Now that seems scary to many people. People who have been taught that in public speaking you get your topic, you research it, you practice it a couple dozen times, and then you stand up and deliver it just like you practiced it. But in actuality, this conversational form of public speaking is more natural for us. It's easier than that other approach, and it's far more effective. You've been practicing this approach since you were about 2 years old. As an example of this, let's say you had to break some really bad news to a friend. For example, perhaps their boyfriend or girlfriend was cheating on them. Now you believe that your friend is going to be heartbroken by this, so as you're practicing to break this news to them, you might plan on telling them the news and then consoling them. But when you're face to face with them and you tell them the news, there's a look of surprise on their face, followed by a look of enormous relief. They're glad to be rid of that person. Do you continue to console them because that's how you practiced it? That was your plan? Of course not. We naturally need to adapt our communication to the reaction we're getting from the audience. That's what we mean by audience-centered public speaking. Finally, mediated communication. Mediated communication is when the message is carried over a medium. Medium is just the singular form for media. So examples of this could be print with like books, magazine, newspaper. It can be electronic, like television and radio. It can be digital, like text messaging or the internet. An important characteristic about mediated communication is the delayed feedback. This is the only level or type of communication that does not allow for immediate feedback. Because of that feedback being delayed, the method of the feedback determines its power. For example, if you were right now to text two friends and you told them, I am having the worst day of my life, 2 minutes later, your first friend texts back and asks, what's wrong? A half an hour later, there's a knock on your door. When you open the door, you see your second friend standing there and they look at you and say, what's wrong? Now, the content of their feedback, asking what's wrong, was identical, but the method of their feedback made all the difference. The second implication to the delayed feedback is it makes mediated communication particularly dangerous to a relationship. The first reason for this is it maximizes the danger of misunderstanding. When we're communicating face to face, we not only have the words, but we have things like tone of voice and facial expressions. So many messages are sent paralinguistically or parallel to the words we use. But when you send a text message or an email, it's just the words. The reader's interpretation becomes your message. The second is when you're in a face-to-face conversation with someone, as you're telling them someone, you get immediate feedback through things like their facial expressions. But when you send a text or an email, you don't get that. Therefore, you send your entire message and then you get the feedback. You lose that ability to adapt to their reaction. For example, let's say you're going to be telling a friend something and it's a secret, but you believe they're in on it. In a face-to-face conversation, you start to tell them, and as you're beginning to tell them, you see on their face a look of surprise and confusion, alerting you that they're not aware of the secret. You can stop. You can say, have you talked to Stephen yet? No? You should probably give him a call. Bye. But if you send it as a text or an email, you send the entire information and then you find out that you betrayed a confidence. Now, as we look at these 6 levels of communication, intrapersonal, interpersonal, group, organizational, public, and mediated, it's worth noting that other than intrapersonal, because we engage in that all the time, mediated is now the level of or type of communication that Americans engage in the most. The most recent research that I saw on this said that the average American spends 42% of their time communicating with others, communicating through mediated communication. Now, this is probably not a big surprise to many of you, since many of you probably communicate a lot on, say, text messaging, social media, or the internet. So that's our discussion on the levels or types of communication. I hope you found this information to be interesting. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me or message me. Thank you. See you at the next video.